Hello and welcome back to the live stream. Thank you for joining me. I hope everybody's having a wonderful day. It has been a hot minute, approximately a month as a matter of fact, between everything I've been busy with and my computer breaking down. There really hasn't been much opportunity to live stream, unfortunately. But now I've managed to find a minute, so here we are once again. I'm quite happy to be back, to be honest. Live streaming is fun, and I did miss it while I was unable to for a little while. I have to say, having your computer break is really terrible. After years and years of a thing just working and never really thinking about it, then suddenly something goes wrong and I'm thinking, oh no, is this where it happens to me? I always see people talking about, back up your data, make sure you've got this and this thing prepared because it will happen one day, it will happen to you and you'll regret not doing anything. And there I was thinking, is this my moment of regret? Thankfully, however, it was not. While it was an absolute pain to get sorted, I had to go ship it off to be repaired. Thankfully, everything's still under warranty, so that was fine, didn't have to pay for anything. But it did take time, it took a ton of time, during which I didn't have my computer, which sucked. When it happened as well, I go to turn my computer on, nothing, no response. I think, okay, that's bad, but let's not panic yet. It might just be, I don't know, you know how machines are sometimes. Things can just choose not to work for whatever random reason. So I unplug it, leave it a minute, right, turn it off and on again. If it's already off, then unplug it, plug it back in. I hit the power button again, it trips the fuse and shuts off the electricity in the whole house. And at that point, it's like, okay, we have an actual problem. This is not going to be a quick, easy, small thing to deal with. This is going to be an actual issue to resolve. But yep, as I said, everything under warranty, wasn't much trouble, just had to ship it off, didn't have to pay anything, and now at last the computer is back working again and I can live stream and do everything else that I've been meaning to do and wasn't able to, so hooray for that. I will probably look into some kind of data backup, just because it was a little frightening. I do now have a copy of my hard drive, because I had to copy everything across before sending it off, because, data protection, stuff like that, they do wipe... tracking... stream back, and we have tracking issues. They do wipe the drive as soon as they get their hands on it, partially for, their testing, they want to see that it's not a software issue, and partially for data protection. So I've got a backup now, but I should see about making some proper ones. There was this online service that I used to use a long time ago, but then they changed some policy and suddenly everything cost more and you couldn't update backup regularly anymore and stuff like that. Very irritating. Plus, the feeling of like, do you really want to back up all your data with some company and you're taking at their word that they won't look through it? I don't know. I try not to be too paranoid about that kind of stuff because it really doesn't help you. At the end of the day, if you're on the internet, you are trusting someone that they're not going to mess around with your data. You're trusting Windows that it's not reporting everything that you're doing. You're trusting your internet service provider, etc., etc. At some point, you have to just assume that people are being forthright and honest when they claim that they're not trying to get at your data. To a certain extent, I still think that a fair amount of, let me turn the music up a little bit, a fair amount of, what are they called? VPN providers are a little bit shady in the things they advertise, just a little bit. But that all aside, back to streaming. Back to trying to figure out what I want to stream. And I figured first stream back I would do a little bit of writing. No particular theme or anything, no project, just I'm gonna write some stuff. I don't know, something, whatever comes to mind. Before I get to that, however, there is something I do have to take a little look at quickly, because yesterday we got an announcement for Europa Universalis 5. And as a long-time player of Europa Universalis 4, I've got to take a little look at this on stream real quick. Oh, I mean, we all knew it was coming, right? Like, nobody thought that Project Caesar, that we've been getting death diaries about for however long now, was anything other than EU5. But now it is confirmed. We've gotten videos with gameplay, which is incredible, and also scuffed because it's Paradox, you know? Paradox is such an interesting company to me because there's a lot of games companies out there where they're constantly trying to screw over their player base. And you look at them and you're like, I'm not going to buy anything from you, I'm certainly going to pre-order anything from you because you're bad and you're not even pretending otherwise, constantly doing stuff at the expense of the players. Paradox is not that. When Paradox's devs claim they want to make a good game, I believe them. When Paradox the company claims that they want to make good games and they don't want to exploit the player base, you know what? I'm willing to give them the benefit of a doubt. The issue is that what I question with Paradox is their ability to actually follow through on that, to deliver the quality that they want to deliver, because they consistently release DLCs and patches and updates to their various games that are completely broken. They're scuffed to hell. So, you know, seeing this game in the early access stuff that a few live streamers and YouTubers got their hands on, being really sketchy on the performance side, makes me think, oh, how is this going to be at launch? I hope that when we get the release date, it's going to be sometime like early next year. I've seen some people thinking like, oh, it's going to be like September-ish, you know, late-ish this year. I hope it's not. I hope that they really take their time with this. But to look at what we've actually got so far, what's been shown, it's a pretty game. I know a lot of people have had comments on the UI. A lot of people really don't like the UI. I do think that combined with the kind of not quite neon brightness of the map, this looks a little cartoony. This looks a little like, which Civ game was it that went in this direction and it wasn't great? Yeah, I don't know. I think it looks okay. I think the map looks fairly pretty, especially when you zoom in. Like, the detail of this is fantastic. I think the UI looks okay. I do agree with a lot of people's criticisms. This, the outliner, this could use a second look. I would like some words there, put some labels on stuff. Hopefully it's gonna have the same options or even better options than you do in EU4, where you can pick what you do and don't want visible on the outliner. I think that would be very good. This stuff, this is the same as EU4, it's just a question of you gotta learn what all these symbols mean and then it will be second nature. The stuff at the top, I mean, that looks a little squished in there, but whatever, this is fine, this is readable. I'm sure once I've got this on my own screen, I mean, I'm in-game, I'm not gonna mind any of this stuff. There is a lot of information in every single menu, every single screen. A lot of information. And without playing it, I don't know how easy this is going to be to pass through. This is absolutely absurd. This is ungodly. Neither the HRE, neither Holy nor Roman nor an Empire. That is Voltaire's nightmare made flesh right there. I love it. I hope that there is another HRE screen. I hope that this is not... Right, like, look, there's a members tab here and an all members tab. I hope the members tab is something sane and all members is just because it's funny. I hope this tab exists purely because it's funny, and if it does, then it's a very good joke. Besides that, I mean, the actual gameplay, it's far too early for me to comment on the actual gameplay. What I've seen has been an interesting mix of stuff that makes me go, wow, this is going to be so interesting to play, and wow, this is going to be such a hassle to play. With the amount of automation options, I think it's fine. You can ease yourself into it. I have seen all of the stuff talking about how they want to make it more immersive, more detailed, more realistic, and I hope that they don't realism the fun out of the game, right? Like, there's a difference between depth of mechanics and depth of gameplay. I think I've heard something similar said about like Dwarf Fortress, where Dwarf Fortress is a really, really detailed game, but most people are gonna go play RimWorld and enjoy it more despite it being less detailed because it has more depth of actual gameplay. And I feel like there's a danger that EU5 runs into that issue, but I think it's a mild danger, you know? I don't like what they've said about like slowing down conquest and that they want to design a game where essentially a world conquest is impossible. I think that's rubbish. Let people play good and have fun, right? If you're trying to raise the difficulty of certain tasks a bit or shift the focus a bit, then that's fine. I'm personally very warfare focused in EU4, I like blobbing, but it doesn't look like blobbing of that sort is impossible here. It even looks like they've got different sorts of blobbing, like economic gameplay looks way more viable. Every other Paradox game where someone tells me that they want to play tall, I'm always like, you're not actually playing anything. There is no play tall in a Paradox game. There is bide your time until the right moment when you attack and blob. There's no... They don't support the gameplay of staying in your one spot enough for it to be fun the entire time. But EU5, with the goods and population and interactions and different country types, stuff like the army-based, the pop-based, etc., the building-based, it looks like there is real potential here for all gameplay where you are sitting in your little bit of land and influencing the world around you indirectly. It also looks like potentially when they mean you can't world conquest, they mean you can't one tag with the same ease as you can in EU4. Ease being a relative term, because I do think that a lot of the people who comment on Reddit severely underestimate their own ability or overestimate the average player's ability. Like recently with the new DLC released for CK3, there's been a lot of conversation about balance and how overpowered and broken certain things are, and I'm sitting there thinking like, hey, I've got a couple hundred hours in that game, and I'm not anywhere near the level of power that these people claim people should get to within like 10 hours of playing. So either I'm just absolutely garbage at that game, or these 2,000 hour players have forgotten that the 2,000 hours in you've beaten the tutorial meme is in fact a meme. That's not the case. 2,000 hours in, this is one of your all-time favorite games. Normal people, quote unquote, I say, with 2,000 hours in a game, are playing for like a dozen hours, maybe a couple dozen. They play a game of this every once in a while, and their game is a few hours long, not 20-hour campaigns every week. The game does need to be a certain amount of accessible. It can still be complex, it can still be intricate, but there's a reason that all these super intricate, let's ditch the UI for pure gameplay, you know, pre-Steam Dwarf Fortress or Aurora 4X or whatever, why they're not as popular despite having all this depth of features, and it's because they're just not as fun. And because sometimes they trade depth of gameplay and interaction for depth of features, which is not the same thing. All in all, I'm going to call myself cautiously optimistic. I think there's real potential here. I think I could enjoy this game, and I trust in Paradox that they're going to give it their best shot. I don't think it's going to be good on launch. I think it's going to be poor performance and bugs, but they'll fix it, and a few patches down the line, we're going to have a truly worthwhile game to play. With all of that said, let me quickly hop on back over to this screen and then switch my window capture over to here. Alright, there we go. Let's do some writing. Okay. I couldn't see any notes. I decided to write here instead of in Google Docs, just cause, really. Felt like it. And just right over here and maybe take a quick sip of my drink. Very nice. Okay. So, no real plan, just kind of writing some stuff. Because I feel like it. What do I want to write about today? A few things have been on my mind recently. I've been reading a story about a necromancer, so I've been thinking about necromancy a lot. Very difficult magic to balance, so to say, when you want to put it in the world, because of how severely it scales and how difficult it is to pick a right level of power where it's still cool and useful, but not massively broken, right? Like, how many undead can you raise? Can you raise intelligent ones? Can they have their own minions? It's kind of magic that spirals out of control very quickly. Besides that, with all of the talk about Paradox games like EU and CK, I have been thinking about, as ever, the pull of different projects. I've been thinking about how what I would do if I were to make a mod for one of those games, probably for EU4, and what kind of lore and stuff I would write in for that. I did think it would be quite funny to make a VTuber mod for EU4, where it's like you have various VTubers pop in as the new deities or leaders of a country, and then you get missions to spread their name across the world. Something like that would be quite funny. I have been thinking about Lit RPG, about Dungeon Core novels, which I've done some streams about in the past. Quite interesting. I've also, with Dungeon Core specifically, I've been thinking about, again, making something. I've been thinking about incremental games, and how I think I've got a fairly decent idea for a Dungeon Core themed incremental game. The question is if it's decent enough to actually be worth trying to make, and whether I want to devote the time to another project and try to make an incremental game. But I do like programming, and it's been a long time since I've coded anything, so it would be very fun to get back into that at some point. I don't know, it's up for consideration. Right now, I was thinking I would just write some descriptions of stuff, just random things. You know, like setting a scene, you know, describe a building or a particular event, a landscape, something like that. I'm thinking now maybe I want to describe things in a more, how to describe this? Not in-universe, but observing kind of way? I don't know, like a tabletop RPG rulebook, how things are described in there. Something similar to that. Maybe I should have picked a theme before I started stream, because now that I'm actually getting to it, I'm like, yeah, I want to write. But what? It's like when you ask someone what movie do you want to watch, or what do you want to eat, and suddenly you're completely paralyzed by the infinite spread of everything that you could possibly pick from. What do you actually want to go with? Saying I should pick a theme was a lot easier than picking one. Oh, maybe I pull up a random generator? I've got a few of those bookmarked, I think. Pick something off of there. Then, where did I put those bookmarks? Here's one. Generator types. Anchor, beings, character. Organizations, maybe? Absolute random categories. Government names, science fiction government names, magical girl team generator. No, nothing here is quite... Nothing here is quite hitting the mark. All nice, it's all interesting, but... eh. What else? I've been reading one story on Railroad that the name escapes me right this second, but it's about a devil, not like from hell, but, you know, around that kind of theming, makes contracts and stuff like that. That was quite interesting. I always like that kind of world building where certain creatures are intrinsically part of the world. You know, like there are a set of 12 archdemons always, and if one of them falls, someone else or some regular demon gets promoted to become a new archdemon. I always thought that's very interesting. Let's explore that. How many what do we call them? How many kind of celestially ordained creatures can we stuff in a world? There we go. So the 12 archdemons. When one falls, a regular one is chosen to take that place and inherit power. Something like that. And then, what else? X amount of local gods. Well, this split into region. So, region god. Something like that. What else? What else can be tied into something? Or maybe not even specific creatures like this type of stuff, or also things like certain positions, e.g. being off a specific country, leader of a certain wage, college, etc. along with power attached to title. Stuff like that. I think that's very cool, that's quite interesting. I've had a few ideas for something like that, but never went anywhere with a story around it, because it's kind of... it's one of those things where it's like, okay, this is a cool concept, but what plot are we going to try and build out of this? Right, like where does this actually lead your characters? What interesting thing are you going to put them through with this? I suppose the idea would be somebody inherits one of these positions and suddenly has all this power to deal with. What else? Yeah, I mean, the easy ones are counterpoint to archdemons, right? You can pick any amount of creatures with different alignments, you know, like angel / celeste, celestials, gods slash dryads, world tree spirits, something nature themed. You can tie something into each type of environment, so like a mountain, river, plains, lord. Add swamp and forest in there and we're playing MTG. Something like that. How do you spell Dryad? It's the other way around. And that's some overlap on those. I think it's because when it comes to kind of polytheist, almost animist kind of gods, like gods of a local region, of a city, of an area, etc. Even though there are more Western examples like that, for example, various like ancient Greek cities that all had their own local patron god of whatever stuff. In pop culture, the influence that this kind of thing draws from is more a pop culture interpretation of Shinto and Eastern religions, and those are very nature. The pop culture interpretation is very nature themed, you know. Lots of that comes from stuff like Studio Ghibli, for example, and like Princess Mononoke. So local gods of the land get kind of lumped into being nature aligned in a lot of ways. There's one story on Royal Road which is a cyberpunk fanfiction, a self-insert, which just recently has some chapters where the protagonist encounters a shrine which is dedicated to like the spirit of cyborgs, basically the god of cyborgs and cybernetics, which was really interesting. So it's not necessarily, it doesn't necessarily have to be nature themed, but then that also comes in with the pop culture interpretations, because a lot of what pop culture media sort of internationally draws from Japan is either the Studio Ghibli style nature stuff or like cyberpunk and that whole aesthetic and theming. So there's a lot of overlap there. I mean, if you look at Magic the Gathering, the at this point no longer recent but newer-ish set Kamigawa Neon Dynasty, and how that has evolved from the original Kamigawa, you can see where the influences came from and what's been drawn on there, why we move from one to the next. Even though personally I don't like it. But then I don't like a lot of what MTG's been doing lately, and neither do a lot of other people, even if it sells and makes money. Unfortunate. Let me take another sip real quick. Okay. Let's Control X that and stick it in the title. I can't have punctuation. Fine. Maybe another note? Move on to something else? Or is there more I want to add to this? I'm not trying to overthink it too hard. This is... my apologies, but this stream is not for the audience. That being said, I mean, I've got my viewer count turned off, but I'm fairly sure after a month away the viewer count is 1. But this stream is not for the audience, this stream is for me to just chill. I'm not gonna fuss too hard about picking a new topic quickly or adding more on this quickly. We can have some downtime in between, we can sidetrack and chat about random stuff. Power attached to titles, power attached to objects is just something I really like in a fictional world. I just think it's cool. I think in the same way that a lot of a certain amount of appeal in lit RPG for me comes from unique class names and skill names and just how kind of cool they are when used. Similarly, I find this kind of stuff very cool. Especially when you really weave it into a story, like the Primal Hunter series of books does a great job of that, where an entire section of how the lit RPG system in that works is the idea of records. In order to grow and become powerful, you don't just need to get XP to level up, you also need to get records if you want to be not only high level but high quality. And records are all about stuff you've done and your a record of who you are, your legacy and impact on the world and stuff like that, your achievements. Which means that a lot of the powerful people have special titles, things they're known as, nicknames that have a kind of mystique and gravity attached to them, which I think is very cool. Or in another one, a story called Demonic Devourer, one of the main character's skills is called Last One Standing, and she has that skill specifically because of the stuff that she's been through, because it really fits her character and her experiences and how she handles fights in the world, because she is generally being thrown into situations where she should be defeated, but emerges being the one person left alive at the end when the dust settles, and so she has that skill. There's a very cool moment where she's fighting, as that kind of story tends to go, her most powerful opponent yet, and has a little speech about how she doesn't care how ridiculous or powerful the thing coming at her is, no matter what, she will be the last one standing, and she uses her skill like it's woven into a sentence, and it's done fantastically, and it's a very cool moment. Definitely one of my favorite lit RPG stories, that one. So yeah, I do like this kind of stuff. I like when people have their own unique powers and position in the world and stuff like that, and I like it even better when it has a specific name. Because I'm going to be quite honest, it can be just a little bit... It can seem kind of silly, self-aggrandizing, if people are naming that kind of stuff themselves, but if a name comes about because either that's just how the universe works, like the system, or just the nature of reality has decided that this thing shall be named as such, like an archdemon is that not because they've called themselves as such, but because that is just what they are. I think that's very cool. Or when the name comes from outside, right? If you're a swordsman and you develop a particular style and call it something overly poetic, that's a little silly. If other people see your sword style and associate you with certain things, and then they decide that what you do is the, I don't know, let's go a little Xantia, the supreme dragon slaying art, then that's cool. Someone else has decided that that's what you should be called, because you just give off that kind of vibe. In that case, yeah, fine, take the cool name, you've earned it. Maybe some Xantia themed stuff? I do like that as a genre. In general, Xantia and Wuxia. I'm a little iffy on the pronunciations. You hear conflicting opinions on how any particular thing should be pronounced. I'm pretty sure no one is pronouncing it the way it's actually said in Chinese. But I'm sure they can forgive us. It's not like most of the stories are from China either. You know, some stuff gets translated, but a lot of what's popular in the West at the moment is actually just inspired by those and then written in English. Which is fair enough, because the Chinese don't seem to be terribly keen on exporting their stuff, which, fair enough, when you have an audience as big as China's population, you probably don't feel terribly compelled to try and tap into the international market, right? You have a big enough audience domestically, So there's a lot less draw to get things translated. So a lot of stuff that is translated is either fan translation, which can have inaccuracies, or it's machine translated, which is just complete nonsense most of the time. You know, barely legible, and you really got to get good at figuring out stuff from context, which is not that enjoyable. So a lot of the things are getting written or getting consumed now in the Western market, in the English market, so American and UK mostly, is written by authors in those markets. What do I write? Maybe come up with some sects or whatever? I have done some of that world building in my head before, just kind of brainstorm like what kind of stuff would I make. I like water themed stuff a lot. I have a lot of ideas for water themed cultivators or sects, or loosely adjacent to that ones. I always feel like an interesting sect needs to have, like a really interesting one needs to have more going on. Oopsie daisy. Those letters are right next to each other. Interesting. So I think an interesting sect going on. They can't just be really good with swords. But like you get lots of those sects, you know, you get in any given Dungeon story you'll have, you know, a few different sects that are all about using the sword super well. You'll have one that's about like bare-fisted martial arts, one that's all about the spear or whatever. But I feel like the best ones have some amount of internal economy. People are learning to fight and going out and using those abilities to get some effect. So, alchemists, or I'm trying to get better at touch typing. It is a work in process. Blacksmiths, stuff like that. You know, people. I feel like he's actually like just becomes way better when they've got a kind of dual thing going on. Here is their fighting style, and here is how they choose to support that. So you've got a sect that's super good with the spear, and also they tend to groves of trees where they grow super powerful trees with iron bark and whatever nonsense you decide to call it, that they use to make their spears out of, you know, stuff like that. Or the fire sect, you know, for something really cliche, the fire art themed sect also has blacksmiths that use those arts to create weapons with. Stuff like that, I think, improves them. What other hobbies can we get? And it doesn't have to be like a profession that's making something. You know, like alchemists and blacksmiths are the two classic, two of the handful of classic formations. Formation masters are another big one. Yeah, pills, weapons, formations, talismans, if you count them separately from formations, they're usually not talismans. Those are kind of a big three in terms of stuff cultivators use and need, so you end up with sects focusing on those a lot. But you can have other secondary things, like in Beware of Chicken, there's the one that's very nautical. They're all about like sailing. Obviously, they don't sail on the water; they sail in skyships. But the sailor tradition is the same as it would be on the ocean. And I think it really adds to them. It adds to them a lot. You compare the... what is the sect called in that story? The Heaven's Isle sect or something like that? You know, their unique thing makes them very interesting. You then have some others, but they also have something going for them. Like the Cloudy Sword sect, the main one that the story is most involved with, is just a have swords fight kind of sect, but then it's made way more interesting by the fact that they make a really big deal out of scholarship and learning the teachings of their honored founders, and those teachings are all about like being a decent person, despite this being a Zangsha world where usually people are very arrogant and self-centered. It's all about, you know, intellectual pursuits and proper living, of it, the kind of philosopher, king, warrior, poet kind of thing, where you need to have both a martial might and the intellect to know how to use it, and it makes the sect so much better. Archivists are another archetype that's pretty cool. What else? Construction. I was gonna write builders, but I think construction is better. Beast taming. Beast taming is one that tends to really fall by the wayside. Beast taming sects are not rare, but they're rarely the main focus and they're rarely powerful. I think it's kind of a balancing issue. It's the same thing that like D&D's Ranger suffers from with an animal companion, and companions in general, you know, stuff like the Warlock Familiar or any caster class that has access to a familiar spell even. If the familiar is too strong and you continue to be capable of doing stuff on your own, you've essentially gotten two characters for the price of one, which, be it in a game like D&D with an action economy or in real life with strength in numbers, just kind of breaks stuff. So a beast taming sect, either the beast can't be that strong, in which case why are you bothering, just focus on yourself, or the beast is strong but at the cost of you being weakened, in which case an assassin is going to slip past your beast and get you, in which case that's a huge vulnerability. Why not just go and do regular cultivation? So there's always a reason to not go for beast taming. You could make it more viable by having the beasts have special abilities or whatever that allow them access to certain stuff that's desirable, like maybe you need a particular alignment of like some mystic dream beast in order to access a dream realm and harvest materials from it. But then how good can those materials be? If they're too good, then you won't have beast taming sects, you'll have everyone has beasts because they all need them to get at those materials. If they're not that good, then why are you bothering? It's a very difficult one. The others, in theory, should have similar problems, except that with how we understand those things to work in real life, it's much easier to just kind of accept the inherent balancing. Like with blacksmiths, okay, this one sect makes supreme, really high level, high quality swords, good for them, but everyone else is still making decent swords, and at the end of the day it's how good you are with the weapon that matters. And then that's fine, it's balanced, we don't think about it too hard. Whereas beast taming, we use tamed animals in some situations. You get like dogs that are trained for the police or the army, but you're not sending your dog into a war zone to go charge the enemy with you. You're picking up a gun. The dog is not going into the trenches. That's just not happening. It's not viable. So to make it viable is very difficult. And I think especially here, the issue comes in the autonomy of the thing. Similar to spirit summoning stuff like that. It's what I mentioned at the beginning of the stream, but I've been thinking about necromancy and how difficult necromancy is to balance if you introduce it into your magic system, because it's just so easy to sideline it completely by not allowing the necromancers to do enough stuff, and so easy to completely make it overpowered by allowing them to do just a tiny bit too much. And finding the right balance is hard, because it's essentially free minions. It's a thing, I think it's the split, it's a thing that no one else has access to that you do. Right? Like if you're the blacksmith sect, everyone else still knows how to make a sword even if they can't make one as good as you. If you're the medical herbalist sect, everyone else still has doctors. If you're the beast taming sect, does everyone else have familiars and stuff like that? Usually no. If they do, then what makes the beast taming sect special? Well, you must be either you must be empowering your beasts in some special way. You must have something better than everyone else. Then it becomes difficult. One potential solution I've seen is that, like, everyone can have tamed creatures, and those creatures can be fairly strong, but what the beast tamers do is that they confuse with them for a special power-up. But then it's again, like, how big of a power-up is that allowed to be? If you've got two creatures of the same level, or, as usually tends to be in cultivation, you've got the cultivator on one stage and the beast on one stage less, and then they fuse together, how much of a boost is that? Are you getting a small boost for the cultivator? Well, in that case, why bother raising the beast to such a high level? Just take a pill. If you get a big boost, then you're getting that big boost without, like, the drawback that some pills or whatever would have of a temporary boost, because cultivation levels are very big on drawbacks for temporary boosts. There's always backlash. If you're getting it without the drawback, then that's huge, in which case everybody's doing it, and there is no set beast taming sect. And I feel like the answer, the solution, should be really obvious in just doing it some similar way to the other methods, but it's simply the lack of relatable real-world context that makes it very difficult to figure out where that balance point is, partially because people will not just take things for granted. You can't lean on someone's cultural perception, on their general understanding of a point, to assume that they'll reach the same conclusion that you did of, like, yeah, this is reasonable. Which you can with other stuff. It's part of the reason why guns in D&D struggle so much. Guns in fantasy settings in general, is because in real life, we made cool high quality guns and went, wow, these are so much better than getting a melee range, we're not doing that anymore. Forget swords and knights and whatever, we're shooting at each other from across the field. But in a fantasy world, you still want to be running in and sword fighting with your opponents because it's cool, but guns are also cool. So you want to have both, and how do you do that? Well, by nerfing the gun into the ground, which is technically historically accurate. Oh, hello, there is a bot. Where is the ban button again? Here? No. Yes, there we go. And, yeah, nerfing them into the ground, which is technically historically accurate. Like, early guns were not very good. You know, when people talk about how, oh, you should be able to include guns in a fantasy setting or put guns in D&D, because historically they did coexist. Like, you had knights on horseback using guns. And it's like, yeah, but they were using really, really old, crappy ones. They were not using our modern perspective of a gun. And when you tell someone you're going to include guns in your fantasy setting, their modern common sense has an expectation of what a gun is built in. And what you present when you try to make a gun balanced does not fit that interpretation. If someone says they want to play a gunslinger, They want the main thing they do to be shooting at people. So when it turns out that the main thing they're actually doing is taking one shot and then dropping their pistol because that's the only shot that was in it, and they can't spend 2 turns reloading, that doesn't work. That's not the fantasy they signed up for. It's not what they're interested in. So now you want to make a weapon that can shoot consistently, because that will be more fun for them. Okay, how do you balance that? Because range is really powerful, and if you don't... If you want to make it ranged and consistent like a bow, then you have to nerf the damage down to bow levels. And at that point, you're not adding anything new, you've just reskinned an archer. And that's not what people signed up for either. They want to be a gunslinger, they want to be different to the archer. So now you have to give them class abilities that synergize with that stuff with a different kind of vibe to them, a different fantasy that they sell to the alternatives. And that is a design challenge that's not easy to achieve, especially when you're also trying to still fit in with the vibe of the rest of your setting. You know, there's a YouTuber, I forget his name now, that I've been watching, who does very funny shorts about D&D, and a couple of them have been about artificers, and basically the artificer getting away with anything. The artificer has a gun, the artificer has a modern car, and when any character in the skit calls it out, the artificer's like, well, the DM allows it, and the DM is just like, yeah, it's steampunk. It's like, no, it's not. But we're using that as a shorthand to wave away the issue, because if you tell someone it's steampunk, you shift their perception of what kind of fantasy we're in, and what they're willing to accept suddenly changes, even though it's no more reasonable or unreasonable than it was a minute ago. Just because they have different expectations now, they're willing to let you get away with different stuff. Hence, the struggles of minions in fantasy in general. Because fantasy sets certain expectations of power that are pretty high, and summoned minions break those quite severely, to an extent that fantasy is not willing to accommodate. In sci-fi, your robots are allowed to be ridiculous. You're allowed to have robots that create more robots and spiral out of control, because it's sci-fi. It's fine. We're operating on a scale of multiple planets. What do we care if you've got a robot or a clone army? Whatever. Make as many of them as you want. It's a drop in the bucket of the scale of the entire setting, you know? And really, we're just waiting for the moment where your AI runs out of control and now all those robots are turning against you. So we're perfectly good with that in sci-fi. We're kind of good with it in fantasy, with villain necromancers, not so much main character necromancers. And we're really not that good with it in cultivation novels, because they are, generally speaking, power fantasies, and if someone's doing something super powerful, you better be letting your main character do it as well. It can't be NPCs only, it has to be PCs. Our main character needs to be able to do the cool thing. Which, yeah, that in summary, I think this was a quarter-hour tangent I've just gone on about why beast taming in cultivation novels is so difficult to pull on. In summary, power levels are difficult. That's it, basically. Okay, what else? Are there any others I want to add to this list? What other stuff can you focus your cultivators on to make them a bit more interesting than just man with sword, or man with spear, or man with fist? Unusual weapons do help to alleviate this somewhat, but I don't think they do enough. Fortunately, they do tend to come with something else tied to them, like for example, if you've got a sect that is using fans as weapons, they're usually either using also some specialized wind arts, or they're using illusion magic. And that tends to be another focus, like what key type / element are you attuned with? A sect of sword users, not that interesting. Fire sword users, much more interesting. I think Demon Slayer, the anime, does this to a pretty interesting degree with the breathing styles. Where you feel like the original breathing style, then the derivatives of the different elements and the ones derived from those, which are really just sword techniques and different approaches to fighting, but they make each of the characters so much more interesting for it. Just the association, just that kind of expansion on what their swordsmanship is, what it means, makes it much more interesting. You can do that in other stories, like for example the Wheel of Time series. Haven't read those, I do know a fair bit about them and I have watched the first season of the show. That gives all of these sword styles these really interesting names and has different names for each of the techniques in a style, and I think it really adds to the presentation, to the extent that it makes just these are sword fighters interesting in a world where you have the one power and full-on mages running around blowing stuff up and chucking fireballs at each other, and somehow I'm still sitting here being like, that guy can sword fight? That's cool. That's really cool. He's cooler than the mages around him, like somehow. It shouldn't work, but somehow. In a cultivation novel, the level of power on average of just everyone is so high and everyone is a really cool sword fighter that just saying, oh, these guys use this style and these guys use this style doesn't really do enough, for me at least, to set them apart. There has to be a little more to it. And key type / element or some kind of enlightenment or something they use bridges that gap fairly well. Speaking of that, made me also just remember the manhwa, the Mount Hua sect returns. That's a pretty good one, where the Mount Hua sect sword arts, despite all of the kind of theming around plum blossoms and stuff like that, are basically just man with sword. There's not much more to it. Still pretty interesting, but I think that's driven by the characters more than it is by the actual martial arts. That novel, despite the amount of fighting in it, is really way more about the character interactions and their dreams and ideals than it is about anything else. But also it reminded me that there is poison, because they deal with the, what's it called? Is it the Tang clan? That's the poison one? You'd think I'd know this by now, because they reuse the same ones. I say reuse. The inspiration that cultivation novels draw from in terms of real Chinese history has a certain amount of sects and clans that are pretty common, and I believe it's the Tang clan that does the poisons, right? Is it the 8 sects, 8 clans? Oh, I should know this by now. With the amount of cultivation novels I've read, I should know this by now. Right, you get the Mount Hua sect is a big one that shows up a lot. The Beggar sect is in pretty much everything. Oh, and that's where it stops in my mind. 2 out of like 16 is pretty bad. I need to go back and reread some stuff, refresh my memory. This is the issue with these things releasing chapter by chapter. You will sometimes take a break for it to let a couple chapters build up and completely forget everything. It's not like a book where you stick with it for the full length and have time to really internalize this stuff. You just get a little bit and then you move on and you forget everything in the process. It's terrible. Poison sects are... You would think they should really fit into the same category of balancing issue as the beast taming, right? Because poison is such a almost cop-out in a fight. It's like, like you're far more powerful than me, you've got better techniques or whatever, but I'll still win because earlier I put this poison into your drink and you didn't notice. And that feels cheap. Unless you're from the assassin's point of view and you get the whole lead up of how they managed to infiltrate and get around the defenses and sneak in, like you're full on Hitman style. But that's never a cultivation novel. I don't think I've ever even heard of a cultivation novel from the assassin's point of view. I've seen a few main characters that use poison here and there, but never full on assassin type. But somehow poison doesn't seem to fit into that category. I think part of it is that cultivation novels do tend to just kind of accept that poison is underpowered in that kind of world. It's either you've got a poison that's strong enough to kill the cultivator, or they use their cultivation to suppress the poison and then you're screwed because you don't have a backup. And I think that's honestly a really interesting approach, because it's something that Western fantasy, when it comes to magic, really struggles with in a lot of places. You get the discussion of, like, if your mages are so powerful and they can do all this ridiculous stuff and only some people have magic, why are there even other governments still? Why are there still kings and republics and whatever? Why isn't literally everything run by mages? And then you get all sorts of excuses and justifications about, like, you know, maintaining the masquerade, or the mages aren't interested, they've got other stuff to worry on, or magic has this and this downside drawback and that's why they haven't taken over. But then there's a few works that just go, well, yeah, of course the mages are in charge, of course they've taken over and run everything. And it's very interesting when they do that. When a fantasy is willing to just go, yeah, this is just stronger. You know, same with like guns in D&D. If you see some fantasy works where it's like, yeah, if people invented modern industrialization and guns, actually mages at this level of power just wouldn't be able to compete. Or on the flip side, how do you balance the tech empire versus the magic empire? Some people's answer is you don't. The magic one runs over them easy, which can be very interesting to explore. For an example, in A Practical Guide to Evil, the web serial, you get, you know, the continent slash largish island of, is it Scalania? The main setting is called? With a few different nations all fighting each other, and all of them being very, you know, very thinking very highly of themselves. They really care a lot about their conflicts, about these like 1,000-year-long grudges between nations, and everyone's fighting for supremacy and to conquer the whole continent, and it will be a huge achievement when they finally win. But then we get this one chapter where our main character is told, like, oh yeah, by the way, the reason that we don't allow our genius goblin engineers to improve our ballistas and develop like full-on autoloaders and eventually guns and stuff is because there's a country somewhere in the world ruled by a bunch of gnomes with a fleet of airships, and if anyone develops technology to a high enough level, they get sent a letter by the gnomes saying, you will stop this now or our fleet of airships is going to bomb your country into the Stone Age. And that's the reason why there isn't advanced technology anywhere around. It's because someone else already got there and they're not allowing anyone else to catch up, which is so interesting for a detail that, largely speaking, doesn't even impact the rest of the story, because there's no outside interference in the conflicts of the story. Like, it's a very long-running, I'm pretty sure Practical Guide to Evil is in the like millions of words. It's a really long web serial. There's a lot of wars, a lot of different factions involved, different countries that try to stay neutral for a while and get pulled in later, and then we're told, like, hey, on a world stage, Calania is like an island the size of England, and the rest of the continents, the world exists out there somewhere. They're way bigger, way more powerful, and they also just do not matter to what we're doing here right now. We're not interested in what's happening across the sea. We've got beef right here. And I think that's in terms of making your world feel real and lived in a very small way, throwing in details like that about the bigger picture is such a great move. There's a lot of great stuff in A Practical Guide to Eve. Like, it's got its rough patches here and there. The prose and the writing aren't the best, and in a few of the... some of its pacing suffers from its nature as a web serial. But the world building and the characters are superb. I think I love pretty much every character in that web serial. They're all really, really good. Definitely one of my all-time favorites. That aside, I suppose I should also put on the obvious one, the demonic cultivators, right? Not a... well, traditionally, not a focus you see a lot. Traditionally, demonic cultivators are villains. They're about as objective evil as you can get. They get their powers by sacrificing innocent villagers and using their blood to refine it into cultivation aids to make themselves more powerful. There's really no arguing that demonic cultivators are not evil, and no one really tries to argue otherwise. So in traditional cultivation novels, they are always an antagonist. But in the recent, I want to say in the last 2 years, at least in the spaces where I read, like Royal Road and that kind of place, Scribble Hub, etc., there's been a really big surge of demonic cultivator web serials. It's been quite interesting. You get kind of a mix in terms of the approaches that people take. First, you have the they're actually not that bad kind of approach, where either the demonic cultivators aren't as evil as they would seem on the surface, and it's one of those, like, you know, what we've seen with superheroes in Western media, where everyone wants shades of grey now. They want gritty realism, and that means that the heroes and the villains both have some stuff that they've done that was wrong and stuff like that. You get that kind of demonic cultivator protagonists. You get the actually evil ones, but we're playing it for laughs kind of ones, which, you know, it's lit RPG, it's power fantasy, it's progression fantasy. Villain MCs are nothing new there, we're just bringing them into cultivation novels now. And then you get the non-evil MC, and we're playing it for comedy. So the reincarnator, but they've ended up reincarnating into a demonic sect instead of a regular one, or they've I swear I saw in a span of a couple weeks like 5 different novels, all of which had the same premise, which was that somebody had transmigrated over to a new world into the body of an elder in a demonic sect. They now had to figure out how the hell to use their powers, how the hell cultivation works, who the hell they are, and the only reason they get away with any of it is because they have such a terrifying reputation that no one's willing to actually fight them, and they can just pretend that everything's fine until they figure their shit out. Which is a pretty funny premise. I can certainly see why a bunch of people chose to pick that one up after someone came up with it. It's always interesting to see the trends of some new premise gets thought up and then a dozen people jump on it. You know, it's the same thing as you see with anime, right? Some mid to low effort anime happens to hit just at the right time to get popular, more popular than it really should have gotten that season, and then the next season you suddenly see a dozen clones of the exact same concept. Sometimes they're new, sometimes they're existing ones, and it's just stuff that would never have gotten an adaptation before gets one now because they saw, oh, this one succeeded, maybe we have a chance. It's funny. But I don't mind it, because actually a lot of them do turn out to be better than you would have expected. Surprisingly better than you would have expected. If nothing else, it's easy watching, you know, a little bit of daytime TV, something you can put on in the background or when you don't want to deal with anything too serious. I think it's good to have a few shows like that. You know, there is a lot of discussion about media literacy and engaging with stuff, and you do want to watch stuff that maybe challenges you a bit more, stuff that's a bit more thought-provoking and stuff like that. But not all the time. Sometimes you just want to watch something because it's fun. It's low-stakes fun, that's why Slice of Life and stuff like that exists. But for those of us who don't want, like, you know, another school, high school kids going to after-school club Slice of Life, it's nice to get a little something different, and a little isekai with some fantasy, some fighting, but no real worries about a plot. It hits that kind of mark. It's something that I would never have considered way back when, but after a few years after growing up, as I'm hitting my sort of mid to late 20s, you do start to kind of grow out of certain types of anime, not because they're not good anymore. There's plenty of those shows that I still look back on and I'm like, yeah, this is fantastic. And even the new stuff is like, yeah, this is fantastic. But man, I wish there were a few protagonists who are not teenagers, because the teenagers just aren't that relatable anymore. And it's horrific because it makes me feel old. But then I remember that I don't care about feeling old, so meh. Meh. With all of that said, we are at a bit over an hour, and after taking such a long break from streaming, I can feel my throat start to strain from yapping away uninterrupted. So I think I'm gonna go ahead and call an end to it here. With my computer fixed and a few things that I've been taking care of IRL done, hopefully I'll be able to stream a bit more often. Of course, that's the same thing I said after my last stream, and then a month passed, so we'll see. We'll see. Hopefully I'll be online again next week. No streams on a weekend, so maybe Monday, maybe Tuesday. Until then, thank you very much for joining me. I hope you've enjoyed the stream, and I shall see you all next time.